Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 6 of FX's A Murder at the End of the World, entitled Crime Scene. The title here is a really unclever homophone that made me groan when I read it. It's a play on the term crime scene, but with the word scene spelled S-E-E-N, as in the past participle of the word see. I don't really want to talk about this terrible title anymore, but I am going to attempt to, just as a means of trying to elevate it beyond what I think the intent of the person was who chose it. But in this episode, Darby decides to get back to the roots of snooping and focus on the victim and not the killer. In an attempt to see Bill more clearly and understand why he might have been killed, her, Lee, and Oliver go into his room to investigate the scene and see what they can make of it. I really don't like how many times I've had to use see or seen in this little explanation. I didn't intend for it to work that well, but I'm not really finished talking about this title. So earlier in my run of videos, I said that I expected a flashback, or the flashbacks, to connect to the present day storyline, and it did in this episode, just not in the more literal way that I expected. Darby turns into, I guess the only way you can put it is he turns to Dexter Morgan in Bill's room using all sorts of skills that I didn't know she had. I mean, I understand that her dad was a crime scene investigator, but I mean, man, she's like, yeah, then Bill staggered over here and he hit his head and the blood. I'm like, okay, you blood splatter analyst now? But all jokes aside, though, she uses the blood to determine that he got a pretty nasty wound, and she finds a copy of her book among his belongings. Oliver Lee asks her to read the most blood-splattered page, which, of course, is in the portion that she reads at the book readings, which we saw in the opening scene of the season. That, of course, means that she's going to pick up where we left off last episode and in the first episode at the murder house with them confronting the killer from the basement. And I'll get to the events of that scene a little bit later, but my point in bringing this up is that this portion of the episode where we see what happens with the killer and the aftermath of that and how it affected Bill's relationship with Darby, I think all of that helps her better see and understand the why behind Bill's death. And then someone said, so what if we call it a crime scene, but S-E-E-N, and just fuck the entire concept into the ground with their stupid fucking dad joke? So I feel like the title has a meaning to it that I tried to apply within the context of seeing the crime through the not through the eyes of the victim, but helping to understand the crime by understanding the victim. But yeah, like I said, they just said, yeah, let's just make it corny and put it S-E-E-N, and I can't believe they agreed with that. But corniness of the episode title aside, this episode was solid. I would have expected a little bit more out of the penultimate episode. I would have liked this one more if it wasn't such a damning episode for Andy, who ingratiated himself to me so perfectly last week. But this was an information dump episode that connected a lot of pieces and made a lot of sense. And for that, I'm grateful. That's pretty difficult to do sometimes. You know, it's easy to provide an information dump, but not so easy to make sure that all of the information holds up under scrutiny. And I think they do that here by and large. I haven't applied that level of scrutiny. I'm not going to sit here and give multiple viewings to this show, but per episode. But I think everything seems to have been everything seems to hold up. At least the things that were important, that needed to hold up, do. And there's still minor issues I have with the show, but a lot of the stuff is easily overlooked. And admittedly, it is me being a nitpicky asshole sometimes. Like, for example, when Oliver is with Lee and Darby, they look at the door cam footage from Bill's door, and Darby notices that the door opened, but nobody is in front of the camera, and says that must mean that someone deleted themselves, like the footage is altered, and somebody must have deleted themselves from the footage. And I mean, sure, given technology, I'm sure that's possible. And given the circumstances, I'm sure that somebody would be motivated to do that. But you didn't think that maybe the motherfucker sitting in a wheelchair right next to you could have been the person who was there? Because he's not going to be up high enough to catch the camera? Like, you didn't think about that? Like, you're supposed to be the smartest... You're supposed to be the smartest person in the room? But Darby consistently be spitting in the face of Occam's razor, dog. Like, I just don't get it. Like, he's literally sitting next to you and you didn't put two... Like, and I'm not saying it was Oliver either. Like, I'm not saying that's what it was and that it wasn't altered video footage. I'm just saying it's wild for the show to position a person in a wheelchair in that scene and not have the supposed smartest person in the room. Consider that it might have been the person in the wheelchair who's not high up enough to be in front of the camera. Like, that's the kind of shit that, like, just, it takes me out of the episodes. Especially since she's already noticed Oliver's well-worn shoes and accused him of faking his paralysis. Like, she should already be suspicious of him. But again, that too was Darby spitting in the face of Occam's razor, because the most likely explanation for that is that his shoes are secondhand. But no, she's just like, you faking being paralyzed, right? Like, oh man, Darby be having me rolling sometimes. Some of the shit that she says, like her conclusions, like in this episode, she's like, yeah, so because it's the easiest way for you to get access to Buenos Aires. Like, how did you know? How did you know they want to go to Buenos Aires specifically? Like. Oh man, I don't know. I also didn't like how when Darby was lamenting not having her laptop, Oliver is like, I was gonna let them take my phone, and produces his phone, and nobody said shit about that. Like, I'd have had questions about that. Like, nobody said, you had your phone this whole time? Like, what have you been doing with it? Have you tried to use it? Have you had any success? Nothing. Or, like, what? Did you refuse to give Todd your phone and he allowed it because you're in a wheelchair? Like, I don't... Like, when Todd was going around collecting phones, you just say, yo, fuck you, Todd. And he was like, all right. Like, I doubt that anybody in that building could have claimed to have not had one, and that would have been believed. So, like, but again, these aren't even necessarily questions that I need answers to. I mean, I kind of do, but, I mean, if I get those answers in the finale because it ties into the plot, cool. But my issue is more so that, like, why aren't these characters thinking of the most obvious thing and defaulting to a thing that's borderline ridiculous? Like, and I'm not even trying to present this as evidence that Oliver is up to no good. I'm presenting it as evidence of how this show could take me out of scenes by having Darby ignore the obvious. A more obvious thing that Darby and Lee and Oliver as well overlooks that I'm less willing to forgive is when Oliver latches onto the term faulty programming in Darby's book. He thinks that Lumet is the murderer because of Bill's disdain for everything that her smart cities are. They even arrive at the idea that the killer isn't working alone, which, I mean, all of these things I, of course, agree with because I proposed them as well. Yet somehow they don't arrive at the theory that Ray could be involved, even though the word programming is in the phrase that Oliver latched onto. It was like they were going to go, faulty programming. You would think it was some sort of program that had gone rogue. Maybe some form of alternative intelligence. What could that be? Let's go ask Lumet. Like, I don't get it, y'all. Like, so yeah, it's like I enjoy the information dump and I appreciate that it all tracks. Like, I can't say like, oh, that's a dumb idea or that's a dumb assumption. It's just the consistent avoidance of the most obvious answer, presumably as a means of keeping the audience in the dark about it. That's really harming the show at this point. Like, if Ray turns out to be involved in this in any sort of way, it makes every character on the show look like a complete fucking idiot for not ever considering it. Like, they keep walking right up to the point of, hey, do you think maybe Ray is involved? And stopping just short of that. Like, even in this episode, they go out of the way to avoid mentioning or talking to Ray. They don't say one thing to Ray. And I'm like, that's like... And I think that's because they want the audience to not think of him, even though every fucking thing that happens can be tied to him. And it's like they think so little of us that we were just like, let's just not talk about Ray, and they're not going to put two and two together. And I'm like, there's so many things that should make everybody in that hotel go, what about Ray? And nobody's doing it, and them not doing it isn't making me forget. They think I'm that fucking basic that I'm just going to forget. And I'm not going to forget that everything really kind of points to Ray's involvement here. And the fact that they're just like not even, they're avoiding it, isn't making me forget that it's the case, because the evidence is still there. It's making me think that you just you just don't know how to write good characters, because you keep having them say and do stupid things. Not say or do stupid things, but avoid the smart, obvious thing. And again, I'm not even necessarily saying that I think Ray is involved, though I do think that. But that's not what I'm saying, though all signs point there right now in the Bill's disdain for what Ray literally is. But it's like the characters are smart all the way up until they get to the point where they should make the obvious conclusion, and then they don't make the obvious conclusion. And that's maddening, and that's what kind of bothers me. So now that I've spent enough time on that, let's talk about what we learned in the information dump. So David and Lee save Darby from the pool, and matter of fact, this is the only moment in the episode where the obvious conclusions are reached. Darby asks Lee, if she was the one who sent the Morse code message through the lamp, and she's like, duh, of course I did that. It's the best way to communicate. And even then, I still think that was Ray, but whatever. Darby then does ask the most obvious question of, well, how do I know you didn't set me up, send me there to get killed? Then Lee gives the obvious, at this point, it's almost like giving the obvious answer is almost kind of annoying, because it's so unimaginative, like it's the default answer. Lee is like, oh, it was already like that when I got here. Like, I'm saying the words along with her, like, she's like, well, how do I know you didn't set me up there? I'm like, well, Lee's gonna say it was already like that when she got there. And Lee's like, it was already like that when I got there. And that's when they come to the conclusion that it may have been hacked. They was like, is the pool top hackable? So like, yeah. And the next step is, do you think Ray might have done? But no, they stopped just short of that. And Darby very appropriately says to Lee, I love to trust you, but you've given me like 800 reasons not to. Like, you're a whole walking lie, so I can't really do that. And that's when Lee finally spills the beans in the information dump. She tells Darby about how controlling Andy is over Zoomer's life, culminating in a slap that would have made Dana White cringe, because holy fuck, man. I'm surprised she didn't break the wall. And that gave me flashbacks to last week's episode of Slow Horses. She says once the hotel is done, she expects that Andy will move them down to the negative 10th floor to live out the impending climate crisis. And then she tells the story of an initial attempt to escape from him. And in it, she plans to rendezvous with a high school friend who lives off the grid in a cabin in Nova Scotia. Now, my thought, again, granted, I don't know a lot about living off the grid, but I consider myself to be a sensible person. I feel like a sensible person would then ask her how she's kept in touch with someone off the grid for all this time and how she organizes arrangement, all this kind of shit, because I feel like living off the grid makes you uncontactable. But Darby ain't a sensible person, so she ain't asked that. But anyway, Lee tells this story of this whole charade where she picks up Zoomer from school, takes him to an amusement park, she dumps her phone on somebody else so that person can be tracked by Andy, and then leaves in different clothes and in a different car. But then when she arrives at the cabin all happy and ready to leave Andy, Andy is, unsurprisingly, because, I mean, if you didn't see that coming, she was just too happy. Like, I'm like, oh, Andy gonna be there. Very fucking predictable. He's unsurprisingly already there. And on the plane trip home, he tells her that she can leave, but Zoomer stays. And she says at the end of the story that she didn't know Zoomer was Bill's son, and I'm still waiting to learn how that's possible. Like, I'm more interested in how they explain that than I am in who the killer is. I really want to know how Lee does not know that Zoomer is Bill's son, and how everyone is collectively known now for 2 episodes. Everyone is in like, well, Lee's known forever, but like we've known this for a while now. I really want to know how she doesn't know this. So we learned this event at the hotel in Iceland that they're all at It was going to be her second attempt at leaving, and Darby lays out everything she's seen that supports this. Rohan's boat was meant for Lee, not meant for Lee, but I think it was Lee was meant to be on it, kind of like an audible, like, oh, we can have Lee be on here too. And her, David, and Rohan were planning on getting her to Buenos Aires with all of the fake IDs and whatnot that Darby found. And this explains that Zodiac boat, as well as the 3 teacups that were in Bill's room on the night he was killed. They were for him, Rohan, and David. Jumping ahead a bit, the episode ends with Todd and Andy arriving at Bill's room with a beaten David. And I think we're supposed to presume that Andy is the killer or involved, and I just don't think that I'm there yet. And that is, I don't think that Lee is lying about everything that she said. I'm just stopping short of thinking that Andy is the killer. The main thing that's holding me up is still motive. Like, why would Andy need to kill Bill? Like, my assumption when they were first telling the story was that, I think Lee was trying to say that it was like the lockdown that was a result of Bill's death, was meant to keep everybody there. Like, it was meant so that way Lee couldn't leave. But that would assume that he knew that Lee was leaving, and I don't think he did. His behavior hasn't shown that for most of the season. And also, that's a whole lot to do just to keep her there. And he also could have killed anybody to create a situation where everybody needs to be locked down, not Bill specifically. So I just don't know that there's a motive that's a strong one for Andy to do this, especially this elaborately. And then nor do I trust Lee. Darby trusts everybody, though. So, I can't even really use her as a... Like, she's suspicious of everybody, but she believes everything she's told. I don't know. Like, how she tells them she got the Wi-Fi network ID from the light bulb, like, that was such an unnecessary sharing of information that I almost feel like that's going to come back around. Because I'm like, why would you even say that? Like, there's so many things that she should have just kept in her pocket. She doesn't need to share every fucking thing she learns. You've heard the rant. I'm not going to do it again. So Darby finally gets to read the book, which prompts us to pick back. I didn't specify. It's been a while. Her book that she found among Bill's belongings. It's been so long since I talked about it. I was like, what book? But the book, her book, which prompts us to pick back up where the opening flashback left off in the season premiere, with Bill standing in front of Darby to block Patricia's killer from shooting her. We learned the killer shot himself, and we see his name was Frank Bell, which made me wonder why Darby didn't say his name when she was doing the whole Ancestry.com rant. They could have said Frank Bell, and I have no idea what the fuck that is, so why did they not say his name? I don't know. Darby also leaves her fingerprints covered in Frank's blood all over the door jam. All over the door jam. In real life, I think that would have made for a very difficult situation for her. I'm sure nothing's going to come out of it here, but I as a completely novice detective, I'm just like, man, your fingers are covered in that dead guy's blood. Maybe don't smear them all over the wall. But what do I know, right? Oh boy. In their hotel afterward, Darby's still pretty obsessed. Even though everything is over, and Bill really downplays the importance of this killer, and I think serial killers in general, he wanted to, basically he's like, the killers are just, the result of faulty programming, and it's really about the victims. And after I finished my notes, I read an article, and I came back to my notes, and I wanted to kind of like add this part in that I'm saying right now, because I found this, what I found in this article to be interesting. This article took this scene and it looked at Bill as kind of like condemning how society elevates serial killers when it should be elevating the victims. And I think that is part of what's going on here. But I really think this just boils down to what everything boils down to, which is love. Throughout this entire experience, Bill has developed a real bond and fallen in love with Darby. But the only thing she's willing to take seriously is the case. So Darby even cops to this herself in present day and says something about how she self-sabotages relationships that she had left him before he left her. So I think if we were to rank what we're meant to take away from this, I'd say that commentary on serial killers and victims is like 1B, but 1A is Darby self-sabotaging her relationship with Bill over her obsession with this killer. And that's why when Bill leaves, he writes the message, I think this is both too much and not enough. And he also said, I left you the car. That's not important. Everything that's come with the case, culminating in them almost being murdered, that's the part that's just too much. Like, this was a fun internet thing. I really got into you, but now, like, a guy just killed himself in front of me. His blood and brains all over my head. It's too much. And for what it's worth, I feel like Bill did see that guy's face and does know who he is and is lying about it. I guess we'll see last week. But going through all that with Darby, for her only to be willing to share murder theories with him and not her love and affection, that's what's not enough. So I like that line. I think there's both too much and not enough from Bill. Really good closing line. So I want to close right now with a couple of thoughts. After they find Darby's book in Bill's room, they hand it to her, and she says, "There are a lot of prints." And I don't think the writers realized that could be interpreted as prints of the book or fingerprints on the book. Like, on the obvious side of things, it would mean the bloody fingerprints on the book. But when they handed her the book, I think it was Oliver, said something like, "Bill has your book." And then she responded, "There are a lot of prints." Like, so how it was written, it does sound like she could be talking about there's a lot of prints in the book. Like, of course Bill would have it. There's a lot of prints. I don't think that was intentional, dog. At first I thought it was a funny slip up, but given some of the other stuff that happened in the episode, that didn't quite work for me, it feels like less funny and more like carelessness. So yeah, heading into the finale, we got a ton of information this week, but it was also mixed in with some, I think, some befuddling choices and avoidance of the obvious deductions. But let's see how they wrap things up next week. I will see you guys then, and until then, peace.